So much, Mpho. Popular multilingual soapie Muvhango's cast and crew have been given an ultimatum by the soapie creator Duma KaNdlovu to vaccinate or lose their contracts. The Sunday World reported last week that Ndlovu threw down the gauntlet to actors and technical staff during a meeting to discuss austerity measures to curb company costs in the new financial season and to minimize the spread of COVID-19. This comes at a time where actors who have been at home waiting to finalize their new contract negotiations begin working from next month. Production houses were some of the hardest hit when the COVID-19 pandemic was at its peak, some having to shut down operations for months and some even indefinitely. But is this no vaccine, no job ultimatum a bit too harsh? We get the perspective from South African Guild of Actors National Chairperson, Devnarain. Jack, thank you so much for staying with us, for your patience, and thank you for joining us this morning as well. It's an absolute pleasure. What do you make of this ultimatum?
I think producers have an enormous amount of risk to try to manage, and you would want to see producers adopting the kind of policies and implementing policies that must serve the best interests of the workplace by offering a safe and sanitary workplace that ensures people's well-being. And there are a number of conflicting rights when it comes to this particular question, because as much as people may have a right to their bodily integrity and the right not to take the vaccine, you would also see that the producer must exercise a right to create a workplace that is safe for all.
I mean, we have seen, even in the space of television and film, some big names that have lost their lives to COVID-19. So it really is a big disruptor, let alone the financial implications of that. But how then do you balance that financial, trying to manage the balance sheet essentially with the rights of the actors and the crew?
Indeed, it is a balance. Producers in this case must be able to balance a number of considerations, including their commercial, their legal, statutory, as well as moral obligations that must all be factored in. And whereas in a conventional employment relationship, you might find that where the employer might say that the employee doesn't have to come into work to fulfill their contract. In the creative space, the only way that a performer can deliver on their contract is to physically be in the set. So you've got to be there amongst other people delivering your work, and that means that the producer will have to try and manage the consequences of the actor either being vaccinated or not being vaccinated. This is why producers must try to implement some kind of policy that regulates the workplace in order to try and to create a safe environment for all people there. So ultimately, it's up to the producer to manage those risks. And given the fact that there is no insurance against any losses that could be incurred if the workplace has to be shut down because of an outbreak of COVID infections, there is a tremendous amount of risk that the producer has to manage, which is why you can see that there is a growing trend, not just in South Africa, but globally, in film and television productions, for producers to opt to have a mandatory vaccination policy.
There are some cast members who are very much against it, and some might be through misinformation or whatever other reasons that they do have. Is it as simple as no vaccine, no contract, will replace you, and the show will go on?
You would hope that the producer might implement some kind of policy that says, if you have some hesitancy, if you have questions about this, we would like to address those questions with you. Because that places a value on the inclusivity of how you get the cast together and how you engage their services. So it would be helpful to try to get people to engage, not just by implementing a hardline policy, but to see producers talking to people about, this is why the policy is important for me. I'd like to understand what's important to you. So that requires an engagement, and you want to try and include that engagement in the scope of negotiating the contract. So we are hoping that more producers, while they are obviously trying to mitigate risk and trying to create safe environments for all to work in, you also want to see them engage with actors and technical crew so that people's concerns are addressed and people are talking about the current scientific thinking and evidence-based science as well, so that people are able to make informed decisions and people feel as if they are part of that decision-making process.
This COVID-19 pandemic has cost, the arts sector, industry, millions, perhaps even billions of rands. We've seen, artists really struggle to cope and to stay afloat. And as a result of the pandemic, productions have had to reshoot. That goes into the millions of rands. I mean, you, as the chair of the SA Guild of Actors, you would be well aware of all of that. As the organization that you represent, Mr. Devnarain, are you going to play a part in perhaps mediating these conversations?
We would like to assist in these conversations. We want to be able to connect with producers at an organizational level so that there is formal engagements taking place where we can all be developing the same protocols together. And you would find that very early on, because we knew that our sector would be so vulnerable to any infection outbreaks, we had to implement policies and to create protocols that were based on international best practices to enable people to get back to work. And no, we haven't recovered. You're quite right in saying that we still remain vulnerable, and the losses that we incurred from last year are still being felt today. So at a sectoral level, it's important for us to be able to connect with producers so that we are all developing the same kind of rules. And it must be, obviously, you'd understand that not every rule is going to suit every environment and is not going to suit every actor. But we have to try to and moderate what is global practice and what can be implemented reasonably in South Africa to try to get people to understand that mitigating risk is the biggest concern, but we have to get people back to work, and we have to try and implement those policies that are reasonable and are practical and that actually work in the South African environment.
Jack Devnarain, thank you so much for your time. He is the chair of the SA Guild of Actors, a balancing act COVID-19 has presented to especially big productions such as Muvhango, who are instituting a no vaccine, no contract, essentially a law, if I can put it that way, into the way they'll be doing things looking into the future. All right. Up next